53rd Battalion fighting around Nisarava in August, and then compare it to the 3rd Battalion who fought on the advance, and also the beachheads. One interesting fact that most people don't know about, or you may know about, is that in 2.5-3 years of fighting in Greece, in Syria, Lebanon, and in North Africa, we lost 1 battalion commander in combat, and that was due to his vehicle hitting a landmine. Kokoda, we lost 3 battalion commanders in a month. That shows you how close and how deadly the fighting was. And that's by no means taken away from what happened in the Middle East, but you lose 1 battalion commander within 3 years, 2.5 years, 3 years. Kokoda, you lose 3 in 1 month. They are Lieutenant Colonel Bill Owen from the 49th Battalion, killed on the 28th, 29th of July at Kokoda. Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Ward, CEO of the 53rd Battalion, killed around the Barrier Waterfall, 27th of August. And of course, Lieutenant Arthur Keys, CEO of the 214th Battalion, went missing on the 30th of August. He was captured by the Japanese twice. He escaped and he got away. And then he was last seen at Sunlander beachhead, being escorted towards Buna, which probably meant he was executed. Right. I'd like to dedicate this to a man I met just a few months ago, William Bill Graydon, one of 2 surviving men of the Kokoda Campaign. He's certainly that we know of, I'll stress. He's certainly the only officer who's survived not only Kokoda but the beachhead. And I think most anyone who knows about Kokoda knows about Bill. He was at Butcher's Hill. He led his company right through the Japanese lines to get to battalion headquarters. Bill was everywhere on that day. He was probably the only officer at Mission Ridge, Butcher's Hill, who fought left, right, south and north, and he lived to tell the tale. Right, here we're going to break into 2. We're going to talk about the 53rd Battalion in August, and then I'll talk about the 3rd Battalion in September. And of course, some of the key sources. You've got the war diaries, you've got the official history, and then you've got the published history. Right, so the formation. On November 1, 1941, the former Militia 55th 53rd Battalion was organised into 2 distinct units, with the bulk of the officers and men remaining in the 55th Battalion. That meant that Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Ward, who was the commander of the 53rd Battalion, he had about 5 officers and 1 private. So you've got 1 private, you've got Lieutenant Colonel, Major, you didn't have company, you didn't have the Sergeant Major, you didn't have the Regimental Major, but you've got one poor private being bossed around by a bunch of senior officers. Eventually you'd be, the battalion would be filled the battalion will be filled by the officers sending out orders that of the 18 militia battalions in New South Wales, each was to supply 63 men to the 53rd Battalion, which was being formed. And by no stretch, I'm not saying this happened all the time, but if you're a battalion commander and you've got to remove 63 of your men to go run the battalion, who are you going to pick? You're not going to pick the best. Each battalion commander, he wants to keep his best officers, his best men. So you're told, right, you need to send 63 of your men off to another battalion you don't particularly know, that works. You're not going to send your best and brightest. Of these men, around about 800, 100 immediately applied for exemption from military service. So you've got Ward, who's just now trying to form a battalion. He's got all his men coming from everywhere, and 100 of those men put out saying, I want an exemption. So he's trying to deal with that. Mind you, every 90 days, he's in Port Moresby fighting, about to fight the Japanese. That shows you what Ward was up against. Training was minimal, consisting of route marching, totally lacking any platoon, company, or battalion level manoeuvres. Just before Christmas 1941, the battalion went on leave. They were told they're going to Darwin, the garrison Darwin. Next day when they come, a couple of days later when they come back, and they go up for roll call. Out of 800 men, 275 men don't show up. That's without leave. So what do? They go around the streets of Sydney, Boxing Day, Shanghai 100 Australian teenagers. You're now in the army, you're now sent to an army camp. That night, we've got Private Clarence James from Canberra. We've caught many questions raised by these youngsters as they stood in their civilian clothes at an army camp. These guys were 18 and 19 years old. And I'll quote, That night, the new recruits gathered around the orderly room, most of them distressed and asking me, where are we going? Is there a telephone I can use? Can I get a message to my mum? In the half-light filtering through the windows, I tried to talk to them to console them. Next day, 27th of December, these young recruits and the rest of the battalion, who bothered to show up the next day, heard on to Transport Cortina and Soperton, and they were informed, you're not going to Darwin, you're going to Garrison Port Moresby, and there's likely going to be a Japanese attack. So you're there to help defend Port Moresby. Sydney Sergeant Keith Irwin was on board the Aquitania, and this is what he said. We received a draft of soldiers, mostly 18 years of age. These poor devils had no idea what was happening to them. Once Aquitania put to sea, we were told that we would be heading for Port Moresby. A training program was implemented so that the NCOs could give the new recruits some elementary training in the use and firing and handling of a .303 rifle. At Port Moresby, the men spent their time being wharfies. Did they spend time learning how to fire even a Lewis gun? No. 303? No. Don't even bother about trying to train them a Bren gun, not that they had any. But they're spending most of their time unloading ships, and they're stretching barbed wire along the beaches and doing guard duties. Unlike the 39th Battalion, War did not take advantage of available secondary officers that were offered to the Militia Battalions of the 30th Brigade. There were 3 battalions, the 39th, the 49th and the 53rd. The 39th took 16 of these officers. The 49th Battalion took 12. Ward, he took 8. Not only decided that he really didn't need the second AF officers, he didn't even place them in commander companies. He placed them in charge. He placed the second AF officers who had experience fighting the Germans, Vichy French and the Italians. He put them as 2 ICs, militia officers who had no experience whatsoever. At this point, that militiaman heard a broadcast from Tokyo Rose, who announced that the Japanese Emperor had heard about the famous Australian Ratchet book. She went on to announce that Australia now had their mice of Moresby, who would soon fall to the Japanese. This is moving on a track. With the Japanese invasion of Gona and Buna on 21st July 1942, the men of 53rd Battalion would soon be rushed up north to help defend the beachheads around the northern beaches and to try and stop the Japanese penetrating further through the Owen Stanleys. Unlike the 53rd Battalion commander of the 39th Battalion, Lieutenant Colonel Bill Owen, he grabbed every ARF officer and NCO he could get, and he placed them in command positions. Only one was not one company commander, Sam Templeton. He was much nonsense has been written about Sam Templeton, and David Howe's going to publish a book on this. That it was he fought in the Spanish Civil War and all this nonsense. He didn't, but he was an outstanding officer. He was a militia officer. He was the right man for the job, and it shows that he and B Company were sent over the mountains before the Japanese arrived. That's how much confidence Bill Owen had in Sam Templeton, even though he was a militia officer. Again, that states militia doesn't equal bad. He had before rifle companies. He sent Sam Templeton, militia officer, with B Company 39th to confront the area from the likely Japanese invasion, soon to be followed by the other companies. So, on the 53rd Battalion, while the fighting was going on around Daniki and Kokoda Plateau, 53rd Battalion told you've got to go head north. And when these guys haven't even seen a Bren gun. They've seen a Lewis gun, probably 5.1 Lewis gun, that's World War I village. So here's what Lieutenant Platter, who was a graduate of Duntroon, he was commanding one of the companies, Sovereign platoons, and he writes on the 14th of August, the night before they were about to, on 15th, take it off into the Only Stanleys. One night we're unloading this ship, and we're due to finish at midnight, and the officers were called together and told, this is very confidential, and you're not to mention to the men, but we're breaking camp first thing in the morning, and we're going over to Stanleys to fight the Japanese. We weren't allowed to talk to the men about it, so the poor fellows finished their shift, back to camp. This is like they spent hours unloading a ship, and Platter said, get some sleep if you can, but you've got to pack your things away. You've got to put everything away. You can't take anything. You've just got to get some sleep and carry on, and get ready to move at dawn. All these men moved into the Owen Stanleys, while 60-year-old physician and Great War veteran Captain Geoffrey Vernon, who has also experienced combat against the Japanese at Kokoda Plateau during the original attack where Bill Owen was killed, he's on his way back to organise medical facilities. He passes the 53rd on their way up to confront the Japanese. This is what he had to say. Walked to a fogey passing the 53rd Battalion who looked very spent going forward. I scrambled down the hill to a fogey, meeting scores of soldiers toiling up. These men of the 53rd, the most spent and disheartening looking of all our troops I've ever seen. The adjutant of the 53rd Battalion recorded in the unit war diary 2 days later on the 17th. Troops appear to be very loaded with ammunition for this class of country. Each man is carrying 200 rounds, 1 grenade, they've probably never thrown a grenade in their life, in addition to normal arms and equipment. Battalion headquarter personnel were found to be unfit, due to no doubt to office work and not sufficient hardening up. 2 days later, 19th of August, the leading elements of the battalion reached Alola, and we'll talk about how critical Alola is in the fighting around Usarava. About 5 kilometres south of the crow flies from Usarava, with survival battle-weary men of the 49th Battalion are digging in, waiting for the Japanese, who were about an hour north. The enemy would soon launch 3 pincer movements against Usarava, and I'll go into that in a minute. If Alola fell, the 49th Battalion that was located further north at Usarava would be cut off and decimated. And mind you, by this time there's probably about 300 men of the 39th left, and that's 4 rifle companies and a machine gun company that's turned into a rifle company, and you're lucky to have 300 men left. Brigadier Arnold Potts, commanding the 2nd IF 1st Brigade, was forced to place the men of the 53rd Battalion in command of Alola and its critical junction. The men of this brigade were now approaching the brigade is the 2nd IF veterans who were now being pushed forward too. They'd been told, you're not to go to Usarava, you're not to go to Alola, you're to stay at Maiola, which is a basic drop zone where food and ammunition being dropped. You're to stay there because you're going to launch offensive operations, but you're not to go until you've got 10 days of supplies. So the Japanese are about to launch an attack against Usarava, against the 39th Battalion. You've got basically five battalions of Japanese who are about to attack Usarava. You've got the 39th Battalion, 300 men. Then you've got the 53rd, probably 400 men at Alola. And then you've got 2 2nd RAF, well-trained, well-experienced men at Alola, but they're not to move. So, Alola, at Usarava, I'm not going to go into great depths about what happened at Usarava, because I'm going to talk about the 53rd Battalion. So I'm going to talk about what happened from the 18th to 29th of August. And you'll see here, Alola, there's 2 tracks. For some reason, you don't see that western track. I can't find it anywhere. You read the battalion histories, everyone talks about this track. I've never seen it put on a map before. So you can see Alola there on the centre. Each flank, coming out each ridge, you've got a track. The Japanese are attacking on the front, and they're attacking east and west. And the 3rd Battalion, you can see where the tracks, all those 3 tracks, that's a Kokoda track running down the centre. And then you've got the 2 other tracks on the east and western flanks, they will join up. So it's a big junction. Alola is the junction of where the tracks meet. That falls, those guys up there are completely cut off. Around 7 AM, 23rd of August, 2 patrols of the 53rd Battalion were sent out. This is a case where the 53rd does really well, comparatively speaking. The first was led by Lieutenant Colonel Raphael, 20 men from A Company. They pushed through the 49th Battalion, and they encountered the Japanese. They're hit with light machine gun fire. They respond, but they're forced to fall back because they're starting being circled. The other patrol led by Lieutenant Hughes from B Company, he moved out to the east. That's down the lower. So the other guys up there, they're pushing up towards Japanese. The other one's going to the east. They don't encounter any Japanese, but they don't push forward to find out where the Japanese are. Well, now they're coming down there. They move out for a short distance, don't find the Japanese, don't come back. Next day, 24 August, Lieutenant Norman MacDonald, this is another successful patrol by the 53rd, led 20 men patrol from A Company and 53rd Battalion, passing through Usarava. The Japanese aren't attacking Usarava yet, but they're just up there. From the Australian front line, and they also encountered the Japanese. MacDonald later reported that the enemy let his men pass through their forward element before they fired and killed leading scout Private Donald McGraw. The patrol engaged attacking Japanese. MacDonald soon discovered more enemy troops surrounding their position, and in a brisk firefight, he reported inflicting 6 casualties against the enemy before having to fall back, leaving McGraw's body. Next day they go out again and recover his body. The Japanese have popped the body up against a tree, hoping that the Australians will try and come to him and in mass and retrieve the body. They do retrieve the body, the scouts go up and bring him in, so they retrieve the body. Another patrol that day went out from Alola. Potts was furious on hearing that a Japanese force had been observed. Patrol did not engage them. Their patrol were out here on the eastern flank. And Potts recorded in his narrative. When asked what action was taken, the answer was that the patrol's task was recce, and therefore nothing was done. Unfortunately, other troops had to pay the price on the neglect of 2 very old principles. Well, A, patrols must fight to get information, and B, If definite answers are not obtained from patrols, definite questions must be asked. If definite questions are to be obtained, definite questions must be asked. 25 August, that's the day before the Japanese really tackled and hit Usarava in mass. 25 August, east of Usarava, that's again over there. Patrol encountered Japanese on multiple fronts. Lieutenant Alan Isaacson from A Company led another 20-man patrol forward to east of Misima Ridge, and that's that ridge up there on the east. They're supposed to be, 51st is supposed to be setting up fighting patrols and warning the Japanese coming down those two ridges. They're not doing it. They're constantly a standing patrol at Kali, and during this ambush, Isaacson was killed. Lieutenant Colonel Ward signalled that patrol was to fall back to Misima. The message, however, did not get through. The battalion adjutant recorded in a war diary that night. Lieutenant Isaacson left at 7:15 on a 2-day standing patrol from Misima to Kali. Reports received by signals at 21:45 that Lieutenant Isaacson's patrol, on moving forward at Kali, had encountered and been attacked by enemy force, strength of 2 platoons. Light machine gun and mortar fire was directed at Kali village, occupied by our troops. Lieutenant Isaacson was killed. Message sent from Battalion HQ that the patrol was to withdraw, but the orders never got through. And it was later stated that a Japanese officer, wielding his sword, Fetterkul further, destroyed the radio set. Soon after Japanese withdrew from the village, it was not until the next day that another patrol from the 53rd was sent out towards Misima. Potts Conference concerns about the 53rd were now becoming to fruition. By now, these men should have been established themselves in and around Kali to the east and Nauru to the west. They were way up north. They're supposed to be blocking those from the Japanese. You've got the Japanese 2nd Battalion, the 144th coming down the east. You've got the 3rd Battalion coming down from the west, and you've got the 1st Battalion coming down along the track, and soon you're going to have 2 battalions, the 2nd of the 41st Regiment, reinforcing the Japanese. Luckily, the Japanese, because of the fighting at Usarava by the 39th Battalion and soon joined by the 214th Battalion, Japanese realised that they're not going to be able to break through from frontal assaults, so they decided they're going to turn the western assault. They're going to stop coming down that ridge and they're going to try and attack the Usarava from the west. Such as the outstanding fighting done at Usarava, the Japanese can't push through. But they're still trying to push through down the eastern slope, eastern ridge. Next day, 26th of August, the men of the 53rd Battalion sent out patrols to the east and west. McDonald with 20 men, a patrol from A Company moved out to the east along Kali track to relieve the Misima patrol, but returned in the evening reporting that the wireless set at Misima was nowhere to be seen and had been smashed, and there was no sign of the patrol that had gone out the night before. He reported killing 3 Japanese, but the enemy had penetrated forward along the track towards Bari. The Japanese are now coming very close to Uluru. At darkness, mind you, now the Japanese are heavily involved, the Australian 39th Battalion, and I think it's A Company, 248 Battalion arrived. The battle of Israel has opened up. At darkness, Captain Thomas Carnes and his men of B Company, 53rd, were ordered forward to push back the Japanese incursion along the Sima Ridge on the Abuari track. However, there was no sign of Captain Frederick Ahern and a 20-man patrol that had gone out the night before to do exactly the same thing. Peter Potts informed Major Allen, who's based in Port Moresby, that the 53rd Battalion's training and discipline was well below standard required. Indeed, Potts was furious with the apparent inactivity and passiveness of the 53rd Battalion, writing the general narrative events for 26th of August. Patrol from the scene occupied by Japs, and without attempting to ascertain the whereabouts of the wireless set, operators and escort who comprised the OP, returned leaving nobody to observe the enemy. The enemy followed the patrol in and was soon established in the vicinity of Abuari. And that is just then, see how close it is. Now next day you're going to have Japanese machine guns firing into the brigade headquarters and medical facilities. That's how close the Japanese are. The enemy definitely exerting strong, this is Potts against continuing, the enemy definitely exerting strong pressure both at Usarava, where he attacked on standing patrol at first light, at midday was engaged the main battalion position with long-range mortar fire, and on the right flank, where he was left to take Abuari. At 1400 hours, the first 2 companies of 214 Battalion arrived from Iola. B Company 53rd Battalion was sent to hold the Misima track again at 1800 hours, but no reports came in during the night. They got no idea what was happening. Next day, 27 August, Japanese machine gun targeted brigade and an aid station at Alua, resulting in several casualties, including the medical officer. This was a great concern to all, especially Brigadier Potts, as he was now clear just how close the Japanese were to Alua and how his right flank was exposed. By noon, as the fighting raged around Usarava to the north, Ward, in his desperation, the CEO of the 53rd Battalion decided, I've got to go out and find out what's going on because I'm not getting any information from my men, from my officers. So he leaves Alua around midday to find out what's happening along the Abarari front. He had nothing from his men since 6 p.m. previous night. Within 30 minutes, Ward along with Lieutenant Roland Logan and Private Roger Foster were heading towards the Abarari waterfall. Ward, Logan and Foster walked into a Japanese ambush, all three were killed. So that's your second battalion commander killed after Owen. Hearing the death of their CEO rattled the men of the 53rd Battalion. Rumours were arrived that the Japanese had cut off the men of B&D companies, and most of these men were now believed to be dead. Soon Lieutenant Lawler from D Company, and interestingly I could not find any information on Lawler. I don't know whether it's a misspelling or, and I've also communicated with Dr. Peter Broom. We don't know, we can't find any information on this officer. D Company made an appearance at Lower, and some of his men, saying that the Japanese had broken through their lines, Potts stands in and tells them to get back to their company around the Abarari waterfall. Brigade General narrative events, this is Potts again, scattered while it was doubtful if D Company did move or even engage the enemy. At 7 p.m, the 53rd Battalion reported to Potts' headquarters that there were still 70 men missing on patrol. There was no contact with B&D companies, which were presumed to be going to Asima, and the Japs held Abarari. B&D companies were certainly nowhere heading up north. They were probably down near the waterfall area somewhere. This was false, as I said, the false report. Potts was now forced to start relieving the men of the 53rd Battalion, with the 2nd IF men of the 216th Battalion, who Potts realised he couldn't do offensive operations. He was hard pressed to defend the area, so he called the 2nd 14th and the 2nd 16th, rushed them forward, trying to help repulse the Japanese. On the 29th of August, the men of the 39th, 214th and 216th Battalions were fighting to hold Usaraba. Indeed, the badly wounded men of the 39th Battalion pushed forward from the 8th post to reinforce their mates. These are men that are badly wounded and sick. With these volunteers were Private Jeffrey Burton, who were called. The battalion was in trouble. 27 out of 30, these are the wounded and sick men, went back. The 3 who stayed were minus a foot, a bullet in the throat, and a fallen blown off. We never did it for God, King or country. Forget that. We did it because the 39th Battalion expected it of us. And we never stopped trying for the battalion's sake until relieved. On their arrival, one of the best battalion commanders in the Second World War, Lieutenant Horner, Ralph Horner, was appalled at the condition of his men coming back to relieve them, to reinforce them. When they learned the desperate, this is what he wrote after the war, when they learned that desperate plight of their comrades, they had left for Usarava. They spontaneously renounced the promise of heaven ahead, and plod back to the perils of hell. I can think of no incident that reflected more radiantly the great esprit de corps, the strong bond of mateship in the battalion. He later wrote how a corporal of the 216th Battalion told him afterwards, it was enough to make a man weep to see those poor skinny bastards hobbling on their bleeding feet. Horner again, Johnson and the last stumbling reinforcements of the stout-hearted sick and wounded from the hospital, yet worthy of Valhalla. Lieutenant Arthur Key had a reserve again, 30 wounded men. These, mind you, they're now pushing up throughout these sick and wounded men, 30 men are pushing up towards this rest house, which is in the middle between two fighters. This is what they come across. The sick and wounded men, reinforcing Usarava, passed through the men of C Company, 53rd Battalion at Usarava Rest House. These men of the 53rd tossed away the mortar bombs they were supposed to have brought forward, and they had no intentions of advancing to Usarava. Now we're talking about the final day of Usarava. 30th of August, Lieutenant Frank Sublett, commanding B Company 216th Battalion, commanded the 2 Company attack to take Abarari village and push the Japanese back along the Sima Ridge. They're trying to hold on at Alala, just over here. These men of 216th were to be supported by Captain King and D Company, which is down at the bottom there. That was to launch the attack. When they launched their attack, these men down here launched the attack, Sublett was going to do a frontal assault. That never happens, so Sublett decides, I'm going to do a flanking move, I'm going to go up north and have 2 companies, 2 platoons come down behind the Japanese. Which he does. Doesn't succeed because the Japanese are dug in. Those men, one man is actually is nominated for the VC, he gets a DCM. There's another guy that he's fighting under arse up besides Kingsbury, he's also nominated for a VC, but he's a DCM. When those 90 Kings attack, Sublett was forced to do this flanking manoeuvre to try and off-balance the Japanese. Half an hour after Sublett was informed that brigade that King and his men had made their progress, he went ahead with his plan attack from the north and frontal. So he's attacking suburbs now. He watches the D Company was going to come up, the Japanese from the south. Suburb was going to do a northwest attack, basically for the Japanese. Realising that's not going to work without the southern attack, so he sends 2 platoons to try and scoop around and surprise the Japanese, and thereby try and get them to push back. King and his men failed to attack instead. King, meanwhile, he radios back saying, or he's got the telephone code saying, can't do it, we're lost, the Japanese are attacking us. Potts tells, and he says, we're withdrawing. Potts basically yells, you're not withdrawing, you're going to attack. King doesn't attack, but he digs in, he doesn't fall back. But the rest of it, meanwhile, the whole Usual front's collapsing, I go into that, and then falling back to the Usual rest house, and that's where Lieutenant Afakiti, he gets captured, he gets lost and eventually killed that afternoon. And real force is forced to withdraw back towards York Creek, and then we start the fight and withdraw back towards Mission Ridge and what turns out to be Butcher's Corner. That's when we were forced to fall back towards Mayo and Templeton's Crossing. The men of the 53rd Battalion were relieved of their automatic weapons and grenades and sent back to Port Moresby. In October, while back in Moresby, these men would be subsumed to the 53rd Battalion, again forming the 55th and 53rd Battalion. Now I'll talk about the Militia of the 3rd Battalion. This is the 3rd Battalion under New South Wales Militia Battalion that was formed before the war. 1937, the re-established 3rd Battalion. The unit was assigned to the 14th Brigade based in Goulburn and Canberra. Most men of the 3rd Battalion at the outbreak had joined the 2nd 3rd Battalion. So the 3rd Battalion, again, like the 53rd Battalion, was in need of men, because most of the guys from the 3rd Battalion went to serve with the 2nd 3rd Battalion. The battalion was reformed with men, but they have this happens very early on. This happened about 1940. So the battalion conducted extensive training, unlike the 53rd, conducted extensive training around Maitland before being sent along to the west, to the 14th Brigade, to the coast around Newcastle, where they did extensive training manoeuvres. In May, they were relieved of their duties and returned to camp near Maitland before going on leave deployment overseas to Darwin, to Port Moresby. In late 1942, War Veteran Lieutenant Colonel Albert Poor and his men of the battalion arrived at Port Moresby. So unlike the 53rd Battalion, these men have known each other for a while, about a year. They've done training, they know the weapons, they know the officers, they know their CIs and vice versa. However, like the 53rd, they did Port Moresby, they're assigned wharf duties. However, they do conduct training in the southern aspects of the old Stanley, so you get to acclimatise and get to know the jungle somewhat. While battalion history records several RAF recruits joined the battalion in Moresby, I wasn't able to find any. And that's not an in-depth review, but every officer I could find, I plugged in and trying to find out their origins, they were all militia officers. So there will be AIF officers in there, but all the officers and NCOs I could find, they were all militia. So further research needs to be done in this regard to find out how many were militia and how many are actually second IF. In the long run, it would turn out to make much difference. On 5 September, Lieutenant Arthur Paul and the 3rd Battalion were sent north to Owen Stanleys. The Japanese now approaching Owabawa Ridge. That's the second last ridge in the Owen Stanleys before you hit Port Moresby. You're hitting the end of the line. Lieutenant Colonel Paul was soon relieved by a second RAF officer, recently promoted Lieutenant Colonel Alan Cameron. Paul was in his 60s, I think, and he was ill, and so Cameron took over. Cameron had a strong personality, to say the least, and would earn a reputation as being an aggressive leader, and some would say he was not a bastard. He originally commanded a company of the 2nd Battalion, part of the Ark Force, when the Japanese invaded Rabaul. He escaped. He commanded the 39th Battalion during the Second Battle of Kokoda Plateau, where he launched an unsuccessful three-pronged attack against the Japanese. He's often been criticised for this. I'm in two minds. He certainly put indecision on the part of the Japanese. The Japanese were pushing forward. The three-pronged attack didn't succeed. The A Company held Kokoda Plateau for 2 days. They had to withdraw, but then the Japanese stood back. Oh, hang on, what's going on? They're actually fighting back. So he probably did a good thing, because the Japanese, when they finally took Daniki, they stopped for 2 to 3 weeks, licking their wounds. So the 3rd Battalion was sent out conducting several aggressive fighting patrols to Uwabara Ridge towards Nauru, where they soon met by the survivors, the 216th Battalion and 240 Battalion falling back from Brigade Hill and Butcher's Corner, the bloodbath there. It was not long before the remainder of the 21st Brigade was passing through towards Uwabara Ridge. Soon the 2nd RAF 25th Brigade, who had landed in Port Moresby, were being rushed forward to Uwabara Ridge to try and hold back the Japanese advance. On 11 September, Cameron ordered his men retired to Uwabara Ridge, where they would take up a position on the high ground east of the village. The 3rd Battalion was tasked with holding the centre right, the position, as the men of the 25th Brigade began to arrive. So they're right up front. Certain survivors of 249 from 216 battalions, what's left of them, probably 100 men, they're combined into one composite battalion. And then defend the extreme left. Van Solomon's, the 3rd Battalion, meanwhile, are conducting patrols along the ridge north to detect any Japanese movement. And here we have the battlefield of Ridge, 15-16 September. Morning 15 September, General Harari, the Japanese General Commander of the Japanese South Seas Force who had invaded Kona and Buna, launched their attack against the Australians dug in along the ridge. Just before 1 p.m, 9 Platoon A Company 3rd Battalion was sent forward to strengthen the forward defence, 21st Brigade. Militia Brigade was sent forward to help out the 2nd RAF. Around 2 p.m, the Japanese launched their main assault against the ridge line at the junction right where the C Company are. You see it there, that's the 3rd Militia Battalion there. Unfortunately, where that arrow is, the Japanese are coming down, that's indefensible. You've basically got, where those two companies are, you've got high ground, and then you've got high ground at the bottom. Right where that arrow is, it's a gully. You really can't defend it. And of course, that's Japanese go charging through it. And then Australians are trying to fire down into it, they can't see the Japanese, and they're down there. Lieutenant Colonel Kara, commanding 21st Brigade, observed elements of the Japanese 3rd 144th Regiment launched their attack against the 3rd Battalion, forcing D Company to fall back from the high point. Indeed, D Company is ordered to fall back by Brigadier Ether, who's in charge of the 25th Brigade. Sergeant Kennedy recalled the fighting here as he called to him by Private William Brown of D Company. The attack commenced with mountain gun, machine gun and rifle fire. How they got there I do not know, but snipers were literally tops. The mountain gun shells, some of them anyhow, landed close to Company HQ. I collected 2 minor shrapnel scratches, one in the head, one on the shoulder. The rifle machine gun onslaught came high on the right flank, was very intense, inflicting some casualties. Beckett, that's the company commander, decided to withdraw and withdrew along the depression towards battalion quarters, which if I remember rightly was on the main track leading to Uwabara. This of course meant that a wedge, you can see which there, established in the early moments through the depression behind the troops at Uwabara Ridge. Fortunately the Japanese did not exploit it any further, but that was the next day. But Garrity also recalled, when the Japs opened fire, I just put my haversack on the ground and was chewing a biscuit when the bullets started flying through the bushes just above my head. I've been very quick to get behind the small rock. It was just after that Lieutenant Wadger jumped across the track and landed beside me. As he hit the ground, he was hit by a bullet. Platoon that the Japs fired on were 30 metres up the hill from where I was. The chaps who came past me were all wounded from D Company. One chap had a bullet thorough right across his stomach, about 2 centimetres deep. Another had both legs wounded above the knees. Another had all his fingers missing from one of his hands. Brigadier Ether, commanding the 25th Brigade, now were Captain James Beckett and his men of D Company fall back again. By the end of the day, we find that the centre of Ether's right flank is penetrated by the Japanese, hurriedly entrenching their newly won position. Even so, the men of the 3rd Battalion continued to hold their perimeter, and that night they sent out men to try and push the Japanese out of the gully. Always finished. This is the second last battle of the day. This is the second day of the Battle of Uwabara Ridge. First night, the Japanese continued their attacks against the Australian positions. The diarists of the 216th Battalion record they were still holding their forward positions when they observed the 2 company attack by men of C and D companies, 225th Battalion, supported by additional attacks by the 2nd 33rd Battalion and D Company 3rd Battalion, who were all trying to squeeze out the enemy. The Japanese of No. 8 Company, 3rd Battalion, 144th Regiment counter-attacked and aiming in to push further. You see that push right through. The place called Sanaku Yama, which is Pyramid Hill. Once that happens, Ethan knows his flank's been turned. The 2nd 33rd is now going to be isolated. He's got no idea how many Japanese are pushing through. They're also pushing through up to the north. You've got the composite company of the 214th, 216 Battalion, what's left of them, trying to fend up there. So Ethan's got no chance, he's got to fall back. In Port Moresby, he's telling him, you've got to hold your ground, and if you say no, I've got to go, if I don't go now, Imminent Ridge will fall. Imminent Ridge is the last ridge. You get Imminent Ridge, you're Port Moresby. So it's decided, yes, okay, you have to fall back, you're not falling back Imminent Ridge. Imminent Ridge, no further. So they really start falling back. At 2 p.m, so that's decided 11:30 that day, start falling back. So most of them are falling back, and the 2nd, 33rd and 3rd Battalion are left behind. So as a fallback position, to hold back the Japanese while the rest of the brigades falls back. So you've got the 2nd, 33rd and the 3rd Militia Battalion basically holding Japanese back while the rest of the brigade falls back. That's how much faith that ESA has in the 3rd Battalion. So they fall back to Imminent Ridge. Imminent Ridge, the 3rd Battalion, they're placed in front, and behind them is the 2nd, 33rd Battalion. So you've got the 3rd Battalion in front holding the right flank, and then you've got a 2nd AF Battalion behind them. EFA's got real confidence in these men. With the Japanese, we fall back to the northern coast the day before the Australians launched their attack on 28th September. They do defend Imminent Ridge. On 28th of September, the Australians launched a great offensive to take back the Rabah Ridge and start moving north, not before the Japanese withdraw. They've finally been ordered by Tokyo to get back to the beachheads. So the Australians launched their big attack, get onto Imminent Ridge, the Japanese are gone. And then it's a race to there's a big battle at Kokoda Creek, one of the biggest battles fought in the Kokoda Campaign in the mountains. It is the biggest, and then just before Templeton's Crossing. All through those battles, the 3rd Battalion is up front. The 3rd Battalion is conducting fighting patrols. The 3rd Battalion is consolidating ground, taking ground, and while the men of the 2nd AIF are being rotated out of the line, the men of the 3rd Battalion, they're in the line continually, they're not withdrawn. So my concluding comments, there's not going to be any surprise, and again this does not reflect on the men of the 53rd Battalion, it reflects on leadership. One militia unit, the 53rd Battalion, failed in the Kokoda Campaign, while others of the 3rd Battalion was shown to be equal, if not better than the men of the 2nd AIF. The failure of the 53rd Battalion is not surprising, given one, few officers and men had sound military training, not even at the platoon level. They were poorly equipped. The worst of the worst were taken from the 18th other units to form the brigade. That's not saying all of them were bad, but you're not going to let your best go to another battalion. A 3rd Battalion failed to report back to duty after going on leave Christmas, requiring 100 teenagers to be shanghaied from the streets of Sydney on Boxing Day. Next day on a ship to Port Moresby. Within 90 days of the formation of the battalion, the men arrived at Port Moresby, and they were treated as wharfies with no military training provided even at platoon level. As a result, there was no spirit of corps, and morale was rock bottom. The Australian High Command seemingly went out of its way to indicate they had no concern for these men's welfare, and as such, many of these men despised the army and the military in general. Another major failure was not just the lack of training by Ward, and only taking 8 2nd AIF officers when he could have taken more. Those he did take, he didn't place in command positions. He put them 2 SCs to inexperienced militia officers. The incredibly rushed nature of their deployment to New Guinea and later towards Kokoda demonstrated a complete disregard for their welfare and had a significant impact on the fighting around Usarava and Burari. Through no fault of the men of themselves. Many of these men will go on to fight with the 39th Battalion, and most will perform just as well as the 39th Battalion veterans, as they were led by competent officers and NCOs. We also know that the 55th, 53rd Battalion was outstanding at the beachheads at Salamanca. The overall failure of the command did not apply to the 3rd Battalion. This is because it had aggressive and determined leader, Lieutenant Colonel Cameron. It had conducted extensive training in Australia. While far from well equipped, it was much better than the situation of 53rd Battalion. They knew how to fire their rifles. Overall, the officers and NCOs and men had time to get to know each other, and finally, training continued on their arrival in Port Moresby, even though they did have to do wharf duties and garrison duties. The officers and men did wherever possible military manoeuvres. As a result, there was a distinct spirit of the corps in the 3rd Battalion, with officers and men knowing the gallant history of the battalion during the Great War. They were confident in themselves and their NCOs. One anecdotal evidence suggests few officers and NCOs had served in the 2nd IF and the 3rd Battalion. In the long run, didn't make much difference. The best example of how to mobilise a militia battalion, if not any battalion, is demonstrated by the 39th Battalion. With a combination of what worked for the 39th Battalion, it not only had the sound leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Ralph Honor, it was also commanded by experienced AIF senior officers leading companies and platoons. This went a great way to making it, in my humble opinion, one of the finest militia units in the Australian Army, if not including the 2nd RAF. And it was a disgrace that it was broken up, but it's now been reformed. Finally, it was outstanding performance of the 3rd and 39th Battalions that went a long way to destroying the Choco myth amongst the men of the 2nd RAF who fought alongside them, a disappointing lot among the ignorant Australian public. Thank you. I just want to take in.
We might and have questions later. Maybe go to your questions. You can see and approach David during lunchtime.
Yep, sure.
This is where I require your patience and cooperation. So from this point onwards, there are going to be a few things that's going to happen. I'll invite a senior member of the memorial to come forward and give a brief as to what you will see and do on the tour. Once he's completed, it'll probably take about 2 or 3 minutes. Once he's completed, I need people with the number 1 and number 2 on their tags. You'll leave this room and exit through the back doors. Now, if you've got a number 3 or a 4, I just need you to stay in the seats until groups 1 and 2 have departed. 3 and 4 will have lunch. Now, after you've eaten and your hands are free, you're not consuming anything, you're then allowed to leave the room and go and visit the Roosie Library, because they are expecting you to be there, have a look what's there and ask any questions. Okay? So, I'll now invite a member of the memorial to come forward.